I'm here with Laura Curtis, author of Singing Our Stories. Welcome, Laura. It's a pleasure to having you here.
Thank you for having me.
It's weird because we are both Laura, so I kind of
I,
saying my name is weird.
yeah,
Tell me a little about the Singing Our Stories. It has a longer title that I don't remember, so tell me about it,
yeah, no
please.
problem. Yeah, no problem. So this was a doctoral dissertation. I did my PhD in music education, and I finished that in September of 2023. My dissertation was called in full, Singing Our Stories, Building Community and Developing Self-Empowerment through the Childless Voices Choir. And what I did is that I worked with 11 women who sang together online. They were all based in the United Kingdom, in England, and they were run by a woman named Helen Louise Jones, and it was originally supposed to be a choir that met in person. The very first session was the very beginning of 2020 in London, England, and then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And so Helen, I mean, it was amazing what she did. She decided to take it online, and it was on Zoom, and it sort of turned into, I'll say it's almost like doing sort of online karaoke, but also with some really good vocal pedagogy, so voice teaching. Helen, taught a song every week, a different song, and she used songs from jazz and musical theater and pop. And yeah, we just learned a different song every week. And she taught us about breath control and how to speak the words, sing the
Yeah.
words, and the rhythms and all that. And yeah, and we sang it. We were all muted, of course, because when you sing on Zoom, the voices sound at different times, and it just sounds awful when it's all together. So everyone was muted, and except for Helen, of course. Sometimes if we were feeling brave, we would sing with our microphone, one at a time, sing with our microphone off, perhaps, or microphone on.
On. Yeah.
Yep. And that didn't happen too often. But yeah, so I started basically my original idea for my dissertation when I started my PhD in 2018 was that I wanted to start a choir here in Canada, in Ontario, where I live, and for women who are childless not by choice. But I saw that Helen posted online and said that she was going to start a choir. And I thought, oh, this might be a really great opportunity for me to actually work with a choir that's not one that I have to start. And
Yeah.
so I contacted her right away. And then I started singing with them. I sang with them for about 18 months before I actually started doing the study. And then we did the study, and yeah, it was an amazing experience.
I know Helen because I went to one of her her singing cycles, and
Yep.
it was awesome. But I think she's based on UK. Did you travel there for do this?
I did, yeah. So I was very lucky in the timing of doing my PhD because, of course, yes, COVID hit right at the end of my second year where I was doing coursework for the first 2 years. It works very differently here in Canada than in some places. I know in the UK it's very different to do a PhD. So after the first 2 years, I then spent time getting all of my ethics approval and that kind of stuff and getting it all prepared. And then in 2021, in September 1st, I moved to England for 3 months. And I'm originally from the UK, so I'm very familiar
Mm.
with England. I was born there. I lived there till I was 8 years old, and then moved to Canada. So it was actually really lovely to move sort of home
Yeah.
for a little while. So I lived in York in England, and then yeah, for all of I so all of the singing was still online. So still participated online from England, and then but the interviews, I really wanted to do as many as I could in person.
Yeah.
Particularly, every one of the 11 women did three one-on-one interviews, and the first round of interviews was to to ask them questions about their childlessness and to give them an opportunity to speak about their experiences. And
Yeah.
I really wanted to have the option if they wanted to do those interviews in person because of the personal nature of them. Some of the women weren't able to due to health issues, which of course, as you know, is a big factor in many people's
Yeah.
experiences with childlessness. And so, yeah, so I did some of the interviews in person and then I did the rest on Zoom and I just audio recorded them and transcribed them. And yeah, and I also did two focus group interviews. So there were two different sessions every week, Tuesdays and Saturdays. And so there were some women who only sang on Tuesday and some only on Saturday. And so what I did is when I did the focus group interview, I took the Tuesday women and the Saturday women. I did two different interviews and we just talked about, they just had a conversation about the singing sessions and how they made them feel and what their experiences were. So yeah, and then after that, the first phase of my study was me participating, singing, observing that stuff for those 3 months. And then that was September till December. And then I was meant to do May and June of 2022 to go back to England. And we were doing a collaborative songwriting and recording project. However, unfortunately, I had to get a hysterectomy in April because I had a pedunculated fibroid that they had to remove abdominally. So I chose, I just said, well, I hadn't been able to get pregnant with my husband at the time. And so I had a hysterectomy in April of 2022. And yeah, it didn't work out that I could go and do the second phase of my study. And so what we did is we did all online in the fall of 2022 instead. And it went right into the end of January 2023 when I went back to England again for a weekend. And 6 of us got together at Eastcote Recording Studios in London, England. And it was the first time we'd ever actually sung in person together, which was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And we sang the song that we had collaboratively composed in the online sessions in the fall. So that was pretty special. Yeah. And the song is called Calm After the Storm, and it can be found on YouTube.
Oh, I'm going to link the video in the description. I didn't know
That'd be
that.
great. Yeah.
And how did everything felt, how the participants felt about that signing, the singing therapy? I think it's therapeutic. I know you were doing a research, but for me, the session I did with Helen was so healing.
Yeah, I think ultimately, there were the sort of things that came up were just very much so in the notion of sort of solidarity between the women and how nice it was to come into these sessions every week and be able to speak freely, not always about our experience with childlessness, just as our life experience, but it was a very sort of judgment-free feeling zone. Some of the women sort of quoted it as being like a safe space. And also the sort of, because of the silencing nature of childlessness, for some of the women, it felt like they were able to unlock their voice and their physical voice to the point where for some of the women, they actually then, it sort of, what came out of it was something that I sort of found is called self-empowerment. So rather than it being something where people talk about empowerment as in like, oh, I'm going to empower these people who have been marginalized, isolated, silenced, shamed, all those things. But rather than that feeling, it was that these women, through working together, through building a sense of community and solidarity, their consciousness was raised about all of the unique experiences of childlessness, because at that time, I mean, say in very recent years, it's like a boom of open communication among the childless, not by choice community. And so during that time, many of these women who had felt very much alone in their experience and hadn't met other people, other women who'd gone through it, suddenly they were able to speak about it freely without feeling ashamed or without one of the women in the study, she called the comments that people often make, people from outside the childless not by choice community, she called them jellyfish stings. And it comes
Mm.
from Bridget Jones's Diary, the movie Bridget Jones's Diary, where she talks about being a single sort of childless woman,
So,
and they say these things that really can sting, right? And
yeah.
so it was a space where you didn't have to worry about that. And so it was, yeah, so yeah. And then through that, this sort of notion of self-empowerment, where again, some of the women felt like much more, I guess, empowered to speak out a little bit more about their experience with childlessness, even like on social media or just with family and friends and co-workers and strangers. Those moments where somebody they meet, one of the first questions, do you have children?
Yeah.
Where many women may have felt silenced by that question and not known how to speak about it. For some of these women, I think it sort of prompted them to be able to just speak a little bit more openly without feeling so much of the shame. I'm not saying that it sort of eradicated any of the
Yeah.
feelings, but it was sort of just a way to sort of boost, I think, their confidence.
I have a membership for childless women, and there are a lot of memberships. I'm a coach, and there are others, and I see that we are starting to talk, and not every conversation we have is about childlessness, but it's easier to navigate certain things about our life, talking to other childless people, because you are not going to hear as a mother this or you should do that. It's another level of understanding. And
Yeah.
I interviewed Robert Norden a few weeks back, and I was talking that I told him, and he also feels the same. I'm so grateful for people like you, like Helen, Shoddy Day, Robin Hadley, that came before us, and they kind of opened the path for us to talk more freely. Because it's true, before that I found about what was happening to me was grief, unfranchised grief due to childlessness in 2022, 23, and there weren't enough voices about it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think your study kick-started it a little.
I think, I mean, I certainly can't and won't take credit for being sort of one of the pioneers of it. I would, yes, in terms of it being connected to singing, I will say I'm the first person that's ever done a research project with a childless not by choice population and singing. Yes, definitely. But I mean, we go back to Jody Day, obviously, in 2010, right? She published her first book. And then but yes, certainly I would say in the last 5 years, I think that a more sort of public awareness of research that's been done certainly has been coming forward. And I know that there are others, yeah, I say like Robin and myself, and oh, I feel terrible. There's a woman in the States, and I suddenly can't remember her name, but she also she did a PhD in social work, I believe, or something like that, sociology,
Yeah.
something like that. And she also about the experience of childlessness. Gail Leatherby, who's she's been doing research on childlessness, infertility, and also motherhood, actually, which I love. Like that. I just think that to have that broad perspective, and for and she is childless not by choice, but yeah, she does research on motherhood as well. And I think the part where I've gone to, because I am far along in my journey with childlessness, my ex-husband and I, my husband at the time, and I did in 2011 is when we did fertility treatments. So we did a full round of IVF with ICSI, so inner cytoplasmic sperm injection. We did that in March of 2011. In June, we did a frozen embryo transfer, and in November, we did another full round of IVF and ICSI, and none of them, of course, were successful. And it was at that point where I just said, I can't do this anymore for
Mm.
myself. And some women are able to, push through and do 15, 16 rounds of it. But for myself, my mental health was just in the basement. Like it was awful.
I'm hearing most of us like get through some sort of thing, either treatment or something, and at some point we said, this is enough. This is taking a
Yeah.
huge toll on my mental health, and I can't do this anymore. I
Yeah.
think, and I think it's I don't know if good is the word I want to use, but it's something we need to be proud of because we didn't burn ourselves to the ground for something that might have never happened either way. You
Yeah,
know, it's not like,
exactly.
yeah, sorry, I
Yeah, it's a
interrupted you.
choice. No, 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 not at all. It's a very difficult choice. For some, it's not a choice. For some, doctors may say, you've done enough, there's nothing else we can do.
Yeah.
The thing that I found really eye-opening throughout my PhD specifically, so I went back to school in 2013
Mhm.
just to do a Bachelor of Music degree, an undergraduate degree. And it was through that I started researching the impact of female sex hormones and the voice. And that really sparked something in me because I found there'd been no research done on the impact of fertility treatments on the female voice, whereas pregnancy, puberty, birth control, menopause, all these things have been studied quite a lot in the sort of musical world. But I sort of had this light bulb moment one day and sitting in the library and realized there's been nothing. So I kind of took that route a little bit in some research at the end of my undergraduate. And then I decided, what, I think I'm going to do a master's. So I went straight into a master's degree in music education, but took a much more sociological stance. And I wrote my thesis and my master's degree on the impact of infertility on female singer identity, because singing has very often and for many decades, centuries, been viewed as a sort of feminine pastime. And
Yeah.
so the notion of like womanhood and infertility and childlessness, all of that for me, I just found there's a connection here. So it was a small project, two amazing women that I interviewed and talked about their experiences with it. And then from there went into straight into a PhD. And then that was the sort of route I took. And it was an incredibly therapeutic journey for me. I don't think I thought it would be. I didn't go into it thinking it would be, but it's amazing what ended up. I mean, I did 10 straight years of university from age 31 to 41, and it was, yeah, it was a lot. And doing the PhD in particular, actually doing the master's, I remember there was a couple times I interviewed the women and I left quite emotionally moved and drained again because the sharing of the stories, and that was really my first interaction with other
Yeah.
women who had gone through something similar or not. But that's the thing, is that similarity and yet uniqueness of our journeys is something that's what was super eye-opening for me. The realization that being childlessness is not always equated with being infertile, and everybody's journey is different. You may be childless by circumstance, you may be childless by infertility. Circumstance could be because you've never met a partner that you felt comfortable, obviously, having a child
Yeah.
with. Sometimes it's, for financial reasons. And then there's this almost gray area, sort of fine line that I've noticed in my own identity as a childless woman, but also in the identities of others as they've spoken about it, which is that my identity has shifted in terms of how I view myself as a childless
Mhm.
woman.
I hope you are enjoying this episode. If you are and want to know more about my membership, please send me an email to happychildlessmindset@gmail.com. Okay, back to the episode.
At the beginning, because my husband at the time was unable to have children, whereas I was considered to be fertile and
Yeah.
I could have had children. So I still felt that I was infertile because my husband and I were together, right?
Yeah.
And so we were infertile. It didn't matter whose fault it was. It never did. And it was never something that I placed on him. At least not, I mean, I can't fully say that because maybe there
Yeah.
were times, right?
Yeah, not
Like,
consciously.
yeah, exactly. It was never something that I felt. And so then it was, and there's this amazing article. Of course, I can't remember the name of it, but the author's last name is Chester. And she just has, there's this one tiny sentence fragment in it talking about identity transformation of women who are childless, not by choice. And it just says, mother, unmother. And that is, I've quoted that so many times in many things that I've written and published and spoken about at conferences, because that you carry that potential identity of mother until you're told you can't be a
Yeah.
mother, right? If you're told that you can't, which not everybody gets actually told that, right? At some point. But so yeah, so for me it was sort of like, no, I'm going to have children, I'm going to have children, I'm going to have children. And then it was like, okay, maybe I'm not going to have children. And when after we stopped the IVF in 2011, I went to university in 2013. I started my master's degree in 2016. And it was in the first year of my master's degree, it was in January 18th of 2017, I was actually diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And so that closed the book on my husband at the time. And we were thinking about trying again when I finished my master's. But because I wouldn't be able to take my medication for my MS, if I tried to get pregnant, I just said no. Like I can't. So I made a choice, right? Like I made a choice to stay married to my husband who couldn't have children, and I made a choice to not try again when I was diagnosed with MS. And then I made I made a choice to have a hysterectomy. That was probably the most empowering choice I've ever made, actually. I think I can say that. Yeah, with total honesty, because I didn't have to have the hysterectomy. And in fact, the surgeon was wary of it because I was only 39 at the time. I had to tell her my whole backstory as to why I just wanted it. And a large part of that was, regardless of the fact that I was coming to terms with my childlessness by the time I was 39, every month when you get your period, if you're somebody who gets their period, every month you get it, it's a reminder. Even
Yeah.
if you feel like you're really past that, you're still reminded every single month that you're not pregnant.
I completely agree.
Yeah. And so for me to have the hysterectomy meant I never have to worry about that again. And also because of the emotional and physical trauma that I went through, which I think most women who do IVF and other forms of assisted reproductive technology, the trauma that I went through with that meant that afterwards, in terms of my reproductive and sexual health, I really struggled to like get my pap tests. I'd had to take like anti-anxiety medication. I didn't go often enough, as much as I should have. And so to have my cervix removed was like, I don't have to go for any more pap tests. There's no chance of cervical cancer if I don't have a cervix. So I literally, like, it was such an empowering, and in fact, so empowering that I had my closest girlfriends, who many of whom have, I'd say, well, half of the group of about, say, 10 of them have children. I said, I'd really like to have an I'm not having a baby shower, and actually celebrated having my hysterectomy. So that was a massive shift in my identity and in how I felt about my childlessness. But yeah, so my identity had really changed to the point where if I'm on Facebook, which I do a lot of Facebook interactions on the Childless Not by Choice community and the Child Free by Choice community, it comes up quite a bit, the notion of sort of identity, particularly with the Childless Not by Choice community.
Mm.
And the way that I identify now is involuntarily child free. And that's because for me, not having children gives me a level of freedom to do amazing things that bring a lot of meaning and fulfillment to my life. And so I actually now can look at my life without children and I see it as a positive that I don't have them. I'm sure it would have been really positive to have them and I would have done other amazing things and I probably would have loved being a mother. But I also love my life, genuinely love my life without children. So it's a funny shift. And it's a shift that through my research, I also, with some of the women who were maybe a little bit further along in their journey, just, mostly when I say, and when I say further along, like it's not a good or bad thing. Most of the time it's time, truthfully, not
Mm.
always. So time does not always heal
I think
with
it's
this.
time and self-work, inner
Mm,
work
hmm.
is I don't think it's just time.
No, 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 definitely not just time. Definitely not. Because no, there are some women who feel deeply, deeply grieved for the rest of their lives and don't ever feel like they've moved through it, through that grief.
Yeah.
And I feel very grateful that I have been able to, that I have had the opportunity to, because not all folks get the opportunity, right? I'm
Yeah.
it's not, and it's, yes, I did a lot of work, like I did so much therapy, psychotherapy. I also had the opportunity living here in Canada that I got to go to university. I got funded for my master's, funded for my PhD. So financially speaking, I was able to manage doing graduate work and to do this research, which in itself was a form of therapy. And every time I presented a conference, and it's really funny because I still cry when I present my research, usually. It's usually right at the end now when I talk about at the very end where I sort of thank everyone and I say, and I'm so grateful to these women, and that's usually when I break down. And it's quite funny at some of the conferences because these are like music education and community music conferences and choral conferences that I present my research at. And a lot of people just have no idea. Like they're so uncomfortable, which I secretly, not secretly now, love because to me, growth happens through discomfort.
Yeah.
I've been very uncomfortable in my life and I've grown so much through that. And so yeah, so when I do cry, I always say it's okay. I just need a second. I'll be right with you. And then I collect myself and I move on and I keep going. And yeah, so it's been, and yeah, and I did actually, when I did my actual PhD research and I started doing the interviews, I hadn't even truthfully even thought about seeing my therapist while I was living in England. But after the first like two interviews, I was like, oh dear. I need to speak with her because I mean I was with her right from January of 2012, like 2 weeks, 3 weeks after we finished our final IVF, I
Yeah.
started to see her. And I saw her weekly for 2 years. I saw her bi-weekly for like a couple years. I saw her monthly for a couple years. And it just, over time, less and less, but very intense psychotherapy. And and again, I'm also grateful that I had the opportunity to do that because, again, not everybody has access to that. So I'm very aware of the fact that there are many just many things to be grateful for in terms of my positionality as well and how that impacts the access I've had to care and my ability then to move through my grief.
I've been interviewing a bunch of people and we all talk about how our identity shift, both men and women. And I think it's really powerful and everyone has a unique take of how they reach that identity shift. The being childless can be a positive thing.
Mhm.
For me, it opened a lot of opportunities, and I didn't do a PhD but it's okay to find your way, and I'm really glad you find yours and you did that study and you're still presenting it because you showcase to the world in a light that sometimes we are not presented.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm so grateful to have the song that I always play at the end of my presentations. And I cannot sit through it without crying. And I still, if I watch it on my own, I still cry watching it. Like I just, because it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to for my own self to have been able to work with these amazing, amazing women who are, their lives are so rich, and their personalities are so rich, and they're all such loving and incredible women. And for us to have, come together through adversity too. Like it was not an easy process to write the song. There were ups and downs, and there was contention, and there was but also a lot of joy. And it wasn't a super fantastic experience for all of the women. There were women who felt it didn't go the way they would have liked it to go. But I write about all of that very openly in my dissertation, the good and the bad kind
Yeah.
of thing. But again, it's not bad. It's just that was the experience for some, that it wasn't a great experience doing it. And for some it was challenging. For some of these women, they didn't identify as singers. So not only were they sort of grappling with their identity as childless women, they were also grappling with their identity as singers. Because yeah, many of them were like, "Oh, I'm not a singer." But then through doing the singing, and because of participating in the research, it gave them the opportunity to think through and talk through the experience more so than the other. Because I didn't, like, there was a lot of women who were doing the singing sessions, but I only worked with 11 of them. It was people that volunteered to take part in the study. Not everybody who sang on those sessions was part of the study. So I didn't take notes on things that the other women said during
Yeah.
the session. It was only what those women that I was working with were saying. But yeah, in the interview part, so the first interview, like I said, was all about like their journey of childlessness, how they came to get there. And then the second interview was about their musical identity and how they identified or didn't identify as singers, all about their musical history, like, you know, when do you sing? Do you sing in the shower? Do you sing in the car? What kind of music do you listen to? What did you listen to growing up? What was it like in your household where you grew up? Was there music, were you influenced? All that kind of stuff. So really diving into their musical identity for the second interview. And then the third one-on-one interview was about their experience within the Childless Voices choir. But really, again, interestingly, again, about this sort of notion of identity, is that Helen who runs it, stated that she was really wary of calling it the Childless Voices Choir, and really considered not calling it that, even as it was already going. She wanted to change. She thought about changing the name because of the notion of a choir, right? What is a choir? She got emails from women who wanted to join, but saying, "Oh, I'm a soprano, I'm an alto, this is the part that I sing." But they didn't understand that. Well, not that they didn't understand. Their notion of what a choir is the traditional Western classical kind of idea of what a choir is. And for me, doing this and I said to Helen, please don't change the name. I said, because this blows it out of the water, right? Like, this is an opportunity to reevaluate what a choir is. And it's really interesting because a lot of work that I've done here in Canada we have an association of choral music called Choral Canada. It's our national umbrella. And then a lot of our provinces have their own. So like Choirs Ontario, we've got our own little, not every province, many provinces have a choral association. And it's all like membership based and much volunteer running and stuff. But interestingly, that notion of what is a choir and inclusivity, trying to kind of break through that sort of barrier of when you identify something as a choir and you think of it as being this very structured,
Yeah.
very, traditional thing, it really excludes a lot of people. And so we, in the choral community now, we've begun saying like choral music and choral and group singing, or choral music and group singing, just to try to get people to understand that there's no hierarchy, right? Like, just because somebody sings in like a professional traditional choir does not take, like, when I look at the experience of myself and the women that I've spoken to about the Childless Voices choir, there was just as much going on in there that was positive and, empowering, as there is in a traditional kind of form of choir. And in my own work, I run a women's choir. I conduct a women's choir here in Ontario. And it's that same kind of thing where it's this community that forms. And the cool thing, kind of going back to where I was talking about sort of what really blew my mind through engaging more and more and more in the Child That's Not by Choice community, is that the uniqueness of the experience, getting to, it's like there's a concept called affective solidarity that I really talk about a lot in my dissertation, which is where you might share like a common thread. You might just all be in a choir, or you might all be childless not by choice, but everybody's experience of that is different.
Yeah.
There are some women in the community who are childless not by choice, and they don't feel a negative impact emotionally or on their life or psychologically at all. It's just what it is, and they're fine with it. And then there's obviously many who it doesn't feel like that for. There's those folks who are childless by circumstance, those folks. And so when you learn about each other's experiences and the differences of affect, how they feel about those experiences, that is actually something that brings them together too, because they're learning about it. They're getting a deeper understanding of each other. So that played a huge role in my sort of findings from my dissertation, for sure. And it's something that really resonated with me, something that I just was also an amazing learning experience for myself, to come to understand that about others.
Absolutely. I think I'm in that space, well, with this podcast, I also think if the word choir would discourage me, instead of, because I think about structure, and I don't even know if I have a good voice or if I'm a soprano or wherever, and I don't even know
Mhm.
the words for the musical
Yeah,
voices. So, but singing in a community seems different. So I get the adding the community singing, because I feel like I'm going there to just sing my emotions and not to be a professional singer in a
yeah,
choir. So I
yeah,
like that.
exactly. Yeah, it's that notion of sort of reimagining the definition
Yeah.
of what choir is as well, and yeah, I say there's nothing wrong with keeping the traditional definition
No.
as well, but it's about, the problem is that choir, the hierarchy, and then group singing in the choral field, like the professional choral field. And it's changing all the time, and it's evolving all the time. And people are in the choral community. I mean, I can only speak for the Canadian choral community
Yeah.
because it's the only community that I'm really attached to. But there is massive change. And you know what? There's also people who are very staunchly, no, this is what choir is. And that's fine, but around them it's changing. It's changing.
Yeah.
The majority of folks are very much, I think, just coming to a realization, and maybe they already knew that there wasn't a hierarchy, but they just didn't know how to talk about it because there was no open access to talking about it. But that's really changed in the past, like, I guess, since the conference, every 2 years there's a conference called Podium, which is Choral Canada's national conference. It's in a different city every 2 years. And in 2022, I was on the organizing committee for the one in Toronto. And we really worked hard to start to talk. I mean, the whole thing was about reimagining, redefining, because it was also post COVID. And
Yeah,
that was one of the really, there's so much bad that came out of COVID. There's so many
yeah,
awful things happened. But in my experience, there's also a lot of good things that have come out of it.
yeah, I
And
completely agree. Yeah,
one of those was in the choral field is I think and also outside of, but I think an appreciation for what impact music can have, and particularly singing. And I think particularly because in during COVID, singing became a super spreader, right?
yeah,
Like that was a super spreader because there were some choral rehearsals where everyone got COVID, but they also didn't talk about the fact that they also shared a meal during some of those and things like that. I'm not saying that they're wrong about the absolutely, like you're singing, you're spitting, it doesn't matter.
yeah.
It's
But
right, like absolutely. But then of course, so yeah, so then singing got this horrible, so it like decimated the choral world. And so it was this rebuilding that happened then and is still happening now. And it's really lovely.
yeah, I think there were a bunch of things that COVID made possible. It was horrible. A lot of people died, but at the same time, there were things that started to change because of that. And that's a
Yeah.
positive thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah. And I think for the childless not by choice community, I think the fact that kind of everyone was forced to go online with everything, I think that really did help to expand the virtual childless not by choice
mm,
community. And it was I think too, it was for many people, I sort of imagine that it was oh my gosh, I need to find people. Like, I need to find people to talk to during this horribly isolating
yeah,
experience of COVID, while also being isolated by childlessness as well,
yeah,
like socially isolated by. So yeah, I mean, I know, like I engage on multiple platforms on Facebook, sorry, multiple pages on Facebook with, and then actually a couple years ago, I started a Facebook group for involuntarily childless researchers, which has been pretty cool. And it's for, I mean, really, it's anyone in the child's not by choice community can get accepted to
mm,
join the group, because then they can learn about research that's being done, right? It's not just exclusively to people who do the research, but it's been incredible to share with each other, with people like Robin Hadley and Gail Leatherby and others, and Jody Day, and to talk about the kinds of research. But it is, in terms of the researchers who are in the group, it is specifically really for childless not by choice researchers who are doing research
all
with
types.
childless not by choice community. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think that that's great because we are so overlooked that we need to have our childless research doing research
yeah,
on ourselves, you know? It's
yeah, yeah, definitely. And it was a big, for myself, I grew a lot through grad studies, especially in my master's. I was very lucky in that I was allowed to take courses outside of music. So I took some courses in women's studies, in the women's studies department. And the first one I ever took was about feminist methodologies, and so feminist ways of doing research. And I was so not, I never considered myself a feminist, because honestly, like in many ways, I was very close minded, honestly, before I went to university, very much so. And I was raised in a traditional family. My parents were married, like very happily married, until my dad passed in 2022. But I've got two brothers, and my mom loved and loves being a mother, and she loves being a grandmother to my brother's kids. And she really wanted that for me. She really wanted that for me, which of course brings its own set of
yeah.
issues as a daughter, only daughter, right? Who can't give her parents grandchildren. Um, but oh dear, hang on, I just lost my train of thought. This happens.
You were
I was
talking about I told you about how awesome is for us to have childless people doing
Oh, yes,
research on
and
trans
feminist.
people.
Yes, that's right, and feminist
Yeah.
research. So yeah, so I had this very sort of traditional view of or a very traditional sense of myself as a woman, what it meant for me to be a woman, which is, to get married and have kids, and
Yeah.
that was a big part of it. So when that didn't happen, so when I started doing these courses in this course, particularly in feminist methodologies, it really opened my eyes to different experiences and the importance of qualitative research, the interviewing part of things, and really the importance of not generalization of information. That's never been my goal. It's not my goal to say this is the blanket experience of childlessness, because you can't.
Yeah.
And it's so, and it's about those individual experiences, but it's also about the fact that my experience absolutely plays a role in who I am as a researcher and how I research.
Yeah.
And I don't apologize for that. In my dissertation, I'm like, this is what it is. This is how I'm perceiving these things. This is how I'm analyzing the data, the interviews, all the things that these women have shared with me. I'm analyzing it from the perspective of a childless, not by choice woman. And
Yeah.
so if it was a man with, or even a woman, if it was another person who had children, they would perceive it differently. They would analyze it differently. The findings would be different. And there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make
No.
research bad research if it's biased, right? Like all research is biased, even
Exactly.
quantitative research.
All
So,
research is biased because
yeah.
either you are in the data collection group, I don't know how to,
Mhm.
or you
Yeah,
are not and you don't perceive things different. It's impossible not to be
exactly.
biased as a human being.
Yeah, exactly. But the one thing I really believe when it comes to doing, and I think most people would believe this, when it comes to doing research, you should be passionate about what you're researching, right? When it comes to topics that are taboo, sensitive, I really feel like it's has a maybe more meaning and more potential for a positive impact if the person doing the research with these other folks has some kind of experience
Yeah.
in similarity with them, if
Yeah,
that
I
makes
think
sense.
it's kind of less dismissive for
Mhm.
saying
Yeah,
like
exactly.
you know the importance of talking about that taboo or that
Yeah.
misunderstood group.
Yeah, and I think too, because of the sensitive nature, particularly, I mean, I think for anyone in the childless not by choice community, but particularly for those who really are struggling with their childlessness, to sit with somebody and be interviewed about your experience with childlessness by somebody who has children,
Yeah,
I don't, I just don't, not to say that people wouldn't, but my perception of it is that you'd be less likely to get a very open and honest conversation going if, like, in terms of your feelings about your childlessness, because
there's this
they
doubt
can't
that
empathize.
is she judging me or her or he judging
Hmm.
me? Uh, you have that
Yeah.
even though if the person that has children has is not judging you, you have that kind of the doubt in the back of your mind of if I tell her that and she judged me what and when you're talking to someone like you, it's you're more open to
Mhm. Exactly.
like share.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting too, because in research, they talk about bracketing yourself out as a researcher, right? Distancing yourself from the research. I can't. There is no way that I can do that. And again, I'm not going to apologize for that. I'm just going to be very transparent. And I mean, this is all stuff that I learned through my graduate study. I didn't come up with this on my own. Like I had amazing mentors and professors and colleagues and peers who really helped me to be okay with being part of the research. And in fact, I did try to pull myself back a little bit from the dissertation when I wrote the dissertation, because I really wanted all of the other women's voices to be front and center. Like this was
Yeah.
about them. but it really was, and it was Gail Leatherby who was on my committee at my defense of my dissertation. I mean, bless her, I was so grateful that she, when I reached out to her, that she took on the role to be there to ask me questions about the dissertation, to read the dissertation. And it was during the defense that she asked, she's like, I don't hear a lot of you in this. And I said, yeah, because I didn't want to take over. I didn't want my voice to be louder than theirs. She's like, yeah, but it is your voice, like you're in it. And so I actually had to do a bit of a rewrite after my defense. I had to edit a little bit to like put myself in there a little bit more. And it was just because, again, when you're hammered over and over in academia of like, bracket yourself out, remove yourself, you should. And so it was a real, that was a real, like, I really grappled with that notion of like pulling back and really getting in
Yeah.
there. So yeah, but I'm so glad with how it turned out. I mean, obviously I'm proud of it. It was really it was 10 years
As you
of
should.
my life. But also, I hope that the women, I mean, obviously, I sent them all a copy of it, and I hope that they all, feel good about it too. I mean, and I'm just incredibly grateful to all of them, really. I mean, to share that kind of information is not easy and it's so
Yeah.
vulnerable, right? And I pride myself on my vulnerability. I am an open book. I will cry in public. I don't care. It's part of who I am. It's part of my journey. Anyone else who'd gone through what I've gone through would probably cry too. So like, and the sharing of my experiences, I share very publicly on my Facebook and I guess Instagram because it kind of connects about my MS and about reproductive health issues I have and about my childlessness and that because I want to get the conversation going. And I've had friends who have children. One of my very best friends who I've known since high school, she's got 3 kids. And we went for a walk one day, and I remember her saying, I'm so grateful to you for helping me to understand how to speak to folks without children. She said, because you don't learn about that. And she had a colleague at work, I think, who came to her and she is or who anyway she met at work, and I think she kind of figured out that the woman didn't have children, and so it helped her by things like because I talked to my girlfriend about like rather than saying, oh, do you have kids, you can say, what does your family look like? Right. And in the same way, what's been amazing again of learning about all these different experiences is that there are many women who are not only part of the childless not by choice community, but also part of the disability community. Right. And so I've also learned things like it's not necessarily great to say, where do you work? Right. What do you do for work? Because not everybody can work.
Yeah.
Right. So it could be things like, so how do you like to spend your time? Right. And if someone works, they'll probably say, oh, I go to work and then whatever. Right. But it's just a different way of asking questions.
Yeah.
And so that's why I like to speak very openly on Facebook and Instagram and at conferences and like that kind of stuff. I mean, that's pretty much where I'm at, my sort of limit of where I'm at for the communities that I engage with, right? I mean, we've all got our limitations of how broad or narrow our field of communities is. But yeah, so I'd say mine's pretty broad because I've got the Childless Not by Choice community and the music community, which is pretty cool that I get to mingle with both and like actually mesh them together, which yeah, I'm super grateful to be able to do that.
I feel reflected because I'm really an open book and I talk in this podcast about every vulnerability that I have, my childhood trauma, my anxiety, my childlessness. And I also kind of mix the communities because it's not like here ends this and start, they are intertwined. And I am interviewing people like you that have MS and people that have mental issues like me. And we always understand that it's not the unidimensional childlessness, that there are so many things
Yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. And it's something that, yeah, I just think we need to just talk more. I think, and that's not to say that I believe that folks going through these things should be talking about them. No, it's private. Like if you want
Yeah,
it private, Keep it private. You don't have to. But there are folks like myself and like you and like Robin Hadley and Jody Day. And there are many other non-public type figures too that just, they do what they can and what they want to in terms of expressing their feelings and sharing their experience. And there's no wrong or right. There's no wrong or right. I mean, I think I wish more was taught in schools about, in particular, and I'll use infertility. In this case, I don't remember in sex ed class in high school being told, what I remember
It
is what
it can work.
basically, yeah, if you have sex, you'll get pregnant. If you have
Yeah.
unprotected sex, you'll get pregnant. That was the overall feeling that I got
Yeah, it was
in
a
my
given.
sexual education.
It
Yeah,
was a given. You have sex, not protected, unprotected sex, you're going to get pregnant. And then
yeah,
you start realizing, well, that's not happening. And
yeah.
a lot of things fall down, and it's a kind of a domino effect.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that I think that reproductive and sexual health also needs to, in terms of education, I think we need to focus a little more even on the social side of it because again, like in terms of social infertility, right? Like
Mm.
where your experience is that you have not met a partner or, there are lots of other reasons, but that doesn't get talked about either. Like it's all very sort of medical, but then they're also leaving out such a huge chunk in terms of the things that can go wrong with your reproductive system, and then you can't have children. Like,
Mm.
yeah, I don't know. Maybe I don't know. And maybe that's something that some folks or believe that should be learned through those who raise you, or I don't know. But I just think that there's a real lack of there has to be a lack of education on it because otherwise, why aren't we talking about it?
Yeah.
Like I don't. To me, there's no other reason if we're not educated on it, and that's not just on the education system, like on the public school
It's
system.
no, it's a societal thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it is. And I mean, obviously we can go into like even media and portrayals of childless not by choice, and Christina Arquette obviously has done that work. And there's the whole, Cruella de Vil, right? All of the and what's her name from The Little Mermaid, Ursula, right?
Yeah.
All the bad villain women, they don't have children, right?
Yeah.
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 So,
But I think m- the more voices we start speaking more publicly, the more
mhm,
awareness it is, and the more the mainstream narrative start shifting and changing. And
yeah.
yeah, let's hope we did
hmm
our how do you say it, grain of sand, the
Yeah,
our
yeah, like
little
a drop in the
contribute.
ocean kind of thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and that's what it is, right? That is what it
yeah,
is. I mean, what do they talk about? Like the butterfly effect, right? Like
yeah,
the flapping of the wings and yeah. There's lots of different analogies we can use for it, but one tiny voice can then be two tiny
yeah,
voices, and then it can be 100 voices, and then it can
exactly.
be really loud and proud. And I think that that's just that's my hope is just that it's not even about loud and proud. It's just loud, just talking about normalizing it because it's something that happens and it happens to a lot of people.
Yeah,
And we should not be made to feel isolated, silenced, and ashamed of not having children,
absolutely,
you know?
absolutely.
Hmm.
Laura, thank you so much for being here. I will post in the description the song and your Facebook and Instagram account so everybody
Thank
can
you.
find you. Thank
That's
you
great.
so
Thank you
much.
so much. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I mean, this is just another opportunity to use my voice in whatever way I can to, again, just kind of raising consciousness of what's happening and what people are going through. So, yeah, thank you.
Bye bye.